My name is Kaylin Atkinson, and in this presentation we'll be addressing the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. Pictured below is President John Adams with his quote, "Liberty, once lost, is lost forever." I thought that this would be a good quote to start the presentation on, because the Alien and Sedition Acts that he passed during his presidency would be seen by much of the public as restricting liberty and cause significant controversy. It is doubtful that Adams expected that during his presidency he would go through the first national security crisis, the initiation of the debate interpreting the Constitution, as well as the fall of Federalist power and the shift to the new Jeffersonian Republican power. The acts were intended to assert control over unnaturalized citizens and to protect the government from criticism. They were signed into law by John Adams, with the support of the Federalist Party, including the public support of George Washington, who told Adams that he even wished that they had been, quote, "more energetic" on the acts. During the 1790s, Britain and France declared war with one another. While the U.S. tried to remain neutral, they soon became involved and were under threat of French invasion. Adams strongly opposed declaring war with France, but was pressured to respond to the threat with the Alien and Sedition Acts. This conflict with France would become known later as the Quasi-War with France, and would be the first foreign threat faced by the U.S. after the Revolution. The Alien and Sedition Acts were comprised of 4 different pieces of legislation: the Naturalization Act, the Alien Act, the Alien Enemies Act, and the Sedition Act. The Naturalization Act extended the requirements of residency before naturalization could occur from 5 years to 14. The Alien Act gave power to the President to remove any aliens he deemed to be dangerous to the order and peace of the U.S. The Alien Enemies Act was similar, but came to play during times of warfare or invasion. During these times, any males above the ages of 14 from the opposing country could be apprehended and removed by the President at any time. The Sedition Act caused the most controversy, as in Section 1 it prohibits anyone from conspiring to prevent any measure or measures of the U.S. government that were acted upon by proper authority. Section 2 prohibits anyone from speaking, writing, or publishing anything considered slanderous to the government. Many Federalists, like George Washington, believed that the encouragement and advice given to France was coming from unpatriotic Americans and European immigrants within the states. This was believed to be able to be solved by censoring speech and from being able to remove any immigrants at the President's discretion. This source is taken from the American Encyclopedia of U.S. Political History. This author brought attention to the immediate effects of unnaturalized citizens. Many recent immigrants decided to move back to their countries after the acts were passed, and many that remained lived in strong fear, and some rarely left their homes. The author then goes on to expand their scope to address a later impact. Significant examples of this would begin just 30 years later, as the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions in response to the Sedition Act would play into the argument of states' rights in the nullification in the 1830s and in the issue of Southern secession. This article is called The Internal Security Acts of 1798, the Founding Generation, and the Judiciary During America's First National Security Crisis, and comes from the Journal of the Supreme Court. This journal explains the dynamic between the Federalists and Jeffersonian Republicans thoroughly, and how that factored in the 1798 measures. By this point, tensions between the Jeffersonian Republicans and Federalists had become very intense. Although these acts were aimed at internal security, the Federalists were accused of using them, the Sedition Act, as a tool against the Jeffersonian Republicans to suppress criticisms of the Adams administration. The Alien and Sedition Acts would be referenced often during the campaign of the 1800 election by the Jeffersonian Republicans, and these acts were often seen as a stain on the Federalist legacy. We cannot be certain how significantly the Alien and Sedition Acts impacted Adams' re-election, but he lost the next election and Thomas Jefferson took power. The Jeffersonian Republicans took over the White House, and power was shifted away from the Federalists that would lose their power and would be gone for good. The nation was still young, but these acts initiated a debate over how the Constitution should be interpreted, especially in the case of the First Amendment, which many felt the Sedition Acts violated. The Alien and Sedition Acts were terminated at the end of Adams' presidency, and all of those who were left convicted under the Sedition Acts were pardoned by Jefferson, and all fines were repaid under a bill that he passed through Congress. Although they were short-lived, the debates initiated by the Alien and Sedition Acts would become very important in the next few decades, especially the issue of freedom of speech, which would become relevant over 2 centuries later. The strength of political parallels from the 1790s to the present is fascinating. Immigration reform is strongly debated, while the power struggle between political parties and between the power of the federal government and states' rights pervades our whole political system. The Alien and Sedition Acts were not a bright spot in U.S. history, but many of the questions they raised are critical to address. The subject of this legislation is rarely highlighted, but it's important in providing the context to allow our perspective to broaden and evolve so that we can form a future to be proud of.